This podcast is made possible by High Radius.
Hi, this is Joan Hilson, CFO of Signet Jewelers, and I'm here with the CFO Thought Leader Podcast.
This is episode 809.
That most employees do not want to go back to the office full time anymore. And so we actually see being 100% remote in the US is a huge competitive advantage. I'll use myself as an example. I live in Montana. Did you know that? Probably not. I moved to Montana in November of 2020. And I'm a perfect example of and we probably had 15 or 16 other folks within our company in the U.S. move outside of California to other states because we have this 100% remote philosophy. We don't care where you're at. It helps us from a talent perspective too, because you don't actually have to be in some of the tech hubs in order to work for AttackIQ.
Hi, it's Jack. On today's show, we speak with Danielle Murcray, CFO of AttackIQ. Turn back the clock to the year 2020, and Danielle Murcray tells us she realizes now she was experiencing a defining moment in her career. Having stepped into the CFO office at cybersecurity firm AttackIQ roughly 12 months earlier, Murcray, not unlike most of her CFO peers, became laser-focused on the company's financial liquidity and operational efficiencies as the pandemic arrived in the U.S. Still, Murcray sensed her organization expected something more from her, something that would help unify AttackIQ's workforce and lead employees to uncover new ways to collaborate in the uncertain environment. That something was CFO Murcray's leadership voice, a voice summoned by its organization to travel well beyond the realm of traditional finance. We speak with CFO Danielle Murcray about that career-defining moment and much more after this. Did you know more than 60% of B2B invoices are paid late? Well, then it should come as little surprise that the priorities of finance leaders have shifted towards accelerating cash recovery and scaling business growth. To address this issue, High Radius now connects your credit, billing and invoicing, cash application deductions, and collections into a single business process and empowers your finance team to champion your business's high-performance culture. More than 700 of the world's leading companies have transformed the office of their CFO with High Radius. Unlock working capital and reduce bad debt with the best AI-powered accounts receivable management software. To learn more, visit us at highradius.com. Hello, we're speaking with Danielle Murcray, CFO of AttackIQ. Danielle, welcome.
Thank you. Nice to meet you, Jack.
Nice to meet you. Thank you for the time. And as always, we begin by asking you to look back for us, Danielle, and curious about those experiences that you feel prepared you to be a finance leader. What would you share with us in terms of those experiences that you feel prepared you?
This is a great question to start out with, so I thank you for that. So I think I would focus on three specific experiences that really, I believe, had a profound impact on my career. So the first one was being an auditor at a Big Four public accounting firm. I know everyone says that, but I did start my career in the Silicon Valley office at Arthur Andersen. I was very fortunate to have joined the firm during the time that many tech companies were going public. So my primary focus was actually auditing those companies and getting exposure to all different types of technology. And so I was provided the opportunity to choose what technology I was most passionate about, and it allowed me to make a finance career out of it. The second thing I would mention is the choice of focusing on startups was just incredible for my career. I actually followed a former CFO that I had worked with to Ironport Systems, which was my first startup, and it really provided me the opportunity to lead the finance function at my first startup, as my previous two finance roles had been at public companies. And I also took on sales operations. This is very important. And that really set me up for success in being both a strategic and operational finance leader. And we were actually acquired by Cisco about 18 months after I joined. And I stayed with Cisco for an additional 18 months running the finance and sales integration teams. And this just made me more attractive for my next career goal, which was to be a CFO by the time I was 35. And I did make it, just in case you're wondering. And the third thing I would say is that I chose to specialize in security companies, and that ended up being really just an amazing decision. And it actually was at Ironport that I fell in love with the security space, and it became a passion of mine. And I think when you can find a passion in something that you're doing, it doesn't really feel like work. And so not only did it happen just to be an incredible industry choice, because it's a very lucrative space, but also the need for technology will never go away. And so what I loved specifically about Ironport was that I felt like I was making a difference in working for a company that was trying to stop bad actors in the early days of security. And then since then, I have focused exclusively as being the CFO at several successful security companies, two of which were acquired by Palo Alto Networks and another acquired by McAfee. And in these roles, I've just focused entirely on helping these startups scale from both a strategic and operational perspective, and really running finance, accounting, HR, talent acquisition, sales operations, and IT.
Oh, great. That's a nice overview for us. Thank you. I want to ask you about Ironport. You were a controller at that point in time, or what? How would you characterize your
I
finance role?
was. I joined the company as a VP corporate controller working for the CFO, who was a mentor of mine, by the way.
And when you're acquired by Cisco, it's not like you're out by the end of the year. You stick around a while.
I was. I actually stayed for 18 months. And the great thing is not only did I run the finance integration, which would be typical for for a VP corporate controller, but because I ran sales operations, they had asked me to stay, and I ran the entire sales integration. It was just a really fantastic experience seeing how a 70,000 person company was run.
Wow. So at Ironport, you ran sales operations, or
I did. I did.
wow. So that you were a VP and controller, but you had a lot of operational experience. It seems a little beyond the traditional role, baby.
It is, and actually, where I got that from was actually my first job out of public accounting. One of my mentors was the VP of legal at the company. It was Brio Software, and it's funny. I remember one of the first meetings I had with him, and they were a client of mine, so I knew this gentleman quite well. And he said to me, "Forget everything you learned as an auditor. I'm going to teach you how to be a business CFO." And to this day, he's still a mentor of mine. And so when I was given an opportunity to take on something new, I took it on. I just embraced it. And so I had the opportunity to take on sales ops, and it was a very smart decision, as it turns out, throughout my career.
So there's two other areas I just am curious about, because I know you came out of Anderson and you were in tech. You were right on the sidelines of the dot-com collapse, or you were somehow spared, it looks like, but no one was spared in certain ways.
No.
Stocks tumbled. And just curious, again, with Anderson, of course, collapsed at about a year earlier. I forget the exact timing there, but it was just a very tumultuous time to have cut your teeth and got on a career path upward, which is what you did. It seems like. Am I right about that, or how would you look back on that period?
Yeah, so I was very fortunate to leave Arthur Anderson when I did. I probably got out about 18 months before Enron and everything collapsed, and unfortunately had to watch quite a few of my friends and my mentors sort of suffer through that process. I don't know if it was luck, if it was career choice. I'm not really sure, but I did come out unscathed in terms of choosing to go to public companies. when I was out of Anderson versus going to startups at that point in time. So as I mentioned, going to a startup was a great decision. It was a great decision after sort of the .com happened. And so choosing public companies ended up being a really smart decision because they were able to weather the storm better than a lot of startups were.
If I understand correctly, you were all the pre-IPO stock options that were being handed out rather generously. That's what you said no thanks to, it sounds like.
Well, I will say I said no thanks during the .com bubble, but luckily I said thank you with some of the other CFO roles I had.
Right. Understood. But okay. So and then the other piece, which is interesting, is after your Cisco time at Cisco, you come out and really the next roles you're in a series of CFO roles. Is that right? Was there any? So somehow you come out the other side of Cisco as a CFO candidate, or would you put it another way?
No, I absolutely did, and I think that the work that I did at Ironport and the work that I did at Cisco, and the impressions I made on some of the board members and the venture capitalist firms really helped me in terms of getting introductions to to other startups, and they felt I was ready to be a CFO. I had always in my mind wanted to be a CFO. By the time I was 35, I've always been very driven, and the hard work paid off, and it happened for me. And I was very fortunate, but I also worked hard and earned it.
And just to understand, again, you went into a series of CFO roles, interesting companies, remain in high tech, but one role that maybe you hadn't done, and I imagine it was during that period that you quickly acquired the skill, which is raising funds or funding, bringing funding in some of these early stage companies you were with, or were they older than early stage? I'm sorry.
Some of them were early stage, but some of them were, I've raised anything from a Series B round all the way to a Series E round. And, again, I think that, building models, being able to work with executive teams, being able to work with the board just came natural to me. And so a lot of trust was put in, but I also, obviously had a lot of mentors to help me along the way. And I'm a firm believer in using your peers. So when I had questions, I wasn't afraid to ask questions. I wasn't afraid to go to peers and say, hey, I've never done this before. Can you help me do this? How have you done this? What's the best way to approach it? And I think that's actually a really great lesson for an up and coming CFO is it's okay to ask questions. You don't know everything and you don't have to know everything. That's why you surround yourself with people that are smarter than you, that know things that you don't know so that you can complement each other very well.
Just one before we ask you about AttackIQ, of the companies that perhaps you had an opportunity to join or join the management team with and turned down, or perhaps thought not for me. Most often, what was the reason why you didn't accept a position?
Culture, the culture of the company. That's very important to me. I work very hard. I put in a lot of hours and I want to enjoy where I go to work every day. And I've had a really amazing track record of working at a lot of companies where I really believed in the culture. I helped shape the culture. And if I didn't feel like it was going to be a good fit to me, the stock options didn't matter to me. The potential the potential money gains or whatever career gains, it just wasn't as it wasn't important to me. I wanted to be happy going to work every day.
Okay. Well, we want to find out now about Attack IQ. And just to kick off the business segment, let's ask you forthright, tell us about Attack IQ. What does this company do and what are its offerings?
So AttackIQ built the industry's first breach and attack simulation platform for continuous security validation, control validation. So we use automated insights. We help cybersecurity teams confidently verify their defenses are working, which then in turn helps protect their reputation and assets. We also deliver the attacker's eye view of breach risk, and this is needed for enterprises to verify the efficacy of their significant security investments.
Interesting. Now, you joined in 2019. So you've been there pre-COVID, actually. I guess you joined in fall of 2019. So we know the world changes a good deal, but we're curious about your initial priorities as you come in? Is it that you had to make some key hires? Is it that you had to reorganize finance in some way? Anything you can share if you think back now to September of 2019?
So I actually joined AttackIQ at a very pivotal point. It's right when the company began to scale. And believe it or not, I've actually kept the accounting function exactly the same. We actually outsourced to a local accounting firm. It works really well for us. And I kept HR the same. But the two areas I really focused on was building out sales operations. And this really helps us effectively and efficiently support the business strategies and objectives of the sales organization, which is really important as you're scaling a company. And then I also focused on building out the talent acquisition function just to support the headcount growth. I'm sure you're aware that we raised $44 million in a Series C round during COVID. And so building out that function to support the headcount growth was super important.
When you say building out sales operations, what was a key hire related to perhaps that?
I actually love that you asked me that question. And the reason for that is this is a great story. So my first CFO role, I hired a gentleman, and we've been working together ever since. It's been almost 13 years now that we've been working together. He has been my right-hand person along the way. And in fact, when I joined AttackIQ, I've known the CEO for almost 20 years at AttackIQ. And I said, I'm happy to come on and be your CFO, but I need to bring on my sales ops person with me. And so that's the key hire, and I don't go anywhere without him.
We'd like to ask you about your lines of sight and those metrics that you pay close attention to. What would those be? What are you looking at before your first cup of coffee in the morning?
So, well, we focus on a lot of different metrics, but kind of keeping on the conversation around sales operations. I mean, we really believe at AttackIQ that we have a greenfield market opportunity being in this space. So we're 100% in customer acquisition mode. So I spend a lot of my time focusing on sales operations metrics such as average sales price or ASP, time to close, and sales rep productivity. But we are also very maniacal just about data and analysis around the company. And so while we do focus on some of those sales metrics, we are a SaaS company at the end of the day. And so we also focus on annual recurring revenue or ARR growth, gross and net revenue retention, as well as sales and marketing efficiency. Those are sort of the top metrics that we look at, or I look at on a daily basis.
I get a sense that your FP&A people, and maybe you have one, or maybe you have a small team, I don't know. But it would be right there, right, with your sales operations, trying to crunch those numbers and understand better the costs of customer acquisition. Or are there, I'm sure there are other projects, but maybe the question should be, if you could have another FP&A professional join your team, what would they be doing?
So, well, I am the FP&A professional, so I would be very, I would be very happy.
I bet you know how to hire a good
I
one
do.
too.
Funny enough, I do. I look at her in the mirror every single day. So I actually perform the FP&A function, which I actually quite enjoy. I mean, the fact that I outsource the accounting function, I love that. So the day to day is done by our accounting firm. So I really get to focus on the business, and that's what FP&A does. And so in working very closely with my head of sales operations, he helps feed my model, and all of the executives and the market dynamics help feed my model. And would be very hard for me to give that up, because it really does make me feel close to the business, and it helps me be just a key contributor to the business, and having a seat at the executive table. But yes, it would be helpful, I would say, to have a little bit of help, and that will be coming as we continue to grow at AttackIQ.
We've been talking to finance leaders recently, really, about cost of customer acquisition and how, given the environment, the economic environment seems to be changing somewhat, and there's fears, I guess, of a recession, perhaps, just given the inflation out there. So the efficiency behind customer acquisition, making sure we're not getting too loose with the costs here, and trying to understand better how we can improve. Are these things that concern you as you look at that cost now, or what?
Yeah, and what we're seeing from a market dynamic perspective is that competition for really good enterprise salespeople it's very difficult. And so I would say over the last 5 years at the different startups I've been at, I've just been amazed at how quickly the costs of enterprise salespeople have just skyrocketed. And, despite thinking about interest rates and thinking about a recession, still really hard to find good people. So just that cost in itself has almost gone up probably 60 to 65% just in the last 5 years. And so as companies continue to grow, you have to find ways to make what you're selling cheaper. And I don't mean from a cost of goods sold perspective. What I mean is by creating a company that really is a platform company. And I like to say that we've done that here at AttackIQ, where we have a platform and then we have think of modules to sell on top of that. And so if you can get into a land and expand strategy where you land with your platform and then you expand with modules, that cost of sale actually goes down quite a bit. And so does customer acquisition costs. It makes you stickier within an organization, so much harder to rip you out from a competitive perspective. And so those are things that we really have been focusing on over the last 18 months in terms of building that platform and releasing these modules to just become more ingrained in the security culture within our customers.
You mentioned enterprise salespeople. We've been having discussions with finance leaders, of course, more broadly around talent and whether they have become more focused on some of the challenges than they have been in the past, and whether they have become more active in trying to help remedy some of the workforce issues that they might be encountering. What about yourself? Can you share with us your mindset when it comes to talent as a CFO?
Sure. I think one of the things that's really hard with talent is being able to measure it, right? I mean, we refer to it as human capital, but at the end of the day, it's really an intangible asset. And so from our perspective, because we believe that just the competition for talent is so high, we really focus on metrics. We talked about this before, but we take a look at things like more traditional metrics like employee turnover and satisfaction using surveys and regular benchmarking, just to make sure we're remaining competitive from a compensation perspective. But we also focus on non-quantitative measures. And sort of tying back to when you asked me the question about, what's one of the most important things, from a company perspective, and I mentioned culture. And I think what keeps people at companies and stops them from taking that call from the recruiter is the culture of a company. And so one of the things that we do, and I don't know if this is necessarily unique, but it's something I'm very proud of, is that we actually hold regular culture meetings with our employees, and we have discussions on what's working and what needs improvement. And then we share in all hands meetings, gosh, this is the feedback we got, and these are the things that we're doing to address it. Because if you can get ahead of that, and you can have people be happy coming to work every day, as I mentioned, they're not going to take that call from a recruiter. You're not going to need to worry about that. And so I focus, quite a bit on the talent side of things. And it's something, the culture is something I'm very proud of at AttackIQ. And I think if you talk to our employees, they will mention that as something that keeps them, in their seats at AttackIQ.
You mentioned the employee churn number is something you perhaps watch closely, but also net new hires. And are there other ways of measuring the workforce?
I think employee turnover and really the employee satisfaction surveys are the two things that we really focus on at this point in time, and really focusing on when we do get feedback from employees on what we can improve. We need to act on it. The worst thing is to ask people for their opinion and then do nothing about it. And so I think through our actions, we show our employees that we do value their opinion and we do the best job that we can, nothing is ever going to be perfect. And so we're always continuously striving to make sure that our employees are happy where they are. And also just being in a successful company and acquiring customers at the rate that we're acquiring them, that's all very exciting for our customers too, or for our employees too, excuse me. Employees want to win. And when you have a winning culture, you're in a winning industry and you have a winning company, that also keeps people in their seats.
Did you modify your remote versus office philosophy along the way? I mean, was it at first obviously remote became part of many companies' worlds, but is part of it going to stay? Is it are you leaving it? Employees come in 2 or 3 days a week. Don't know. What would you tell us?
So
And how might that impact your culture? I guess. Yeah.
it's funny that you mentioned that.
Yeah.
So we made the decision during COVID to release both of our offices in the US. So we have gone fully remote in the US. And, as I'm in a unique position to have both HR and talent acquisition in my organization, I spend quite a bit of time making sure that we are over communicating, that we're collaborating in different ways to make people feel like they're together, even though we're not physically together. We also have very large remote teams in both Argentina and Spain. In fact, Barcelona is the only place where we actually have a physical office, but due to COVID restrictions and other things, some people go in a couple days a week, and actually what I've seen in terms of, I mentioned benchmarking and kind of paying attention to what other companies are doing. We've done our own surveys and the surveys that you see on LinkedIn and through SHRM, that most employees do not want to go back to the office full time anymore. And so we actually see being 100% remote in the US is a huge competitive advantage. I'll use myself as an example. I live in Montana. Did you know that? Probably not. I moved to Montana in November of 2020. And I'm a perfect example and we probably had 15 or 16 other folks within our company in the US move outside of California to other states because we have this 100% remote philosophy. We don't care where you're at. Helps us from a talent perspective too, because you don't actually have to be in some of the tech hubs in order to work for AttackIQ.
Excellent. Very interesting. Thank you for that. And we're up to what we refer to as our finance strategic moment question. And this is, we're just looking for a story or an anecdote, something you can share that reveals how finance plays a strategic role. We know you've had so many of these over time, but we're hoping you would just pluck one out for us. And what would that be? What would be a finance strategic moment you could share with us?
Sure. So I'm actually going to use the pandemic as a really great example here, just because I think it's top of mind. But I think leading through the pandemic is actually the perfect example of a really kind of defining moment in my career. In the beginning of the pandemic, no one really had any idea how long it was going to last, what the buying behaviors of customers were going to be. And so I actually had to immediately shift my focus from my normal day-to-day activities of running the business to things like liquidity and financial stabilization, and really trying to drive operational efficiencies because we wanted to make sure the company was going to remain on sound financial footing. This helped really reduce the fear and uncertainty that the pandemic brought, both professionally, but also personally to our employees and our investors. And then when the pandemic went into the second year, my focus continued to shift. I believe the leadership that I showed during the first year of the pandemic really led to me being viewed as a strategist and a change agent on the executive team versus, a lot of CFOs are seen as traditional or behind the scenes, which not me, by the way, but a lot of folks are. I don't know that anyone would ever describe me as behind the scenes, but I think you get my point.
Yep.
And so I really promoted stability within the organization, and I've built trust with employees and investors really through open, honest, and clear communication. So I'm proud of how we weathered the pandemic, and I mean we're still in it, right?
May I ask then, when you first joined Attack IQ, you were at a office complex in Silicon Valley, is it?
Yes, we were. We had two physical offices in the U.S. We had employees in Santa Clara, which is where our headquarters were, and then we were actually founded down in San Diego. So we had quite a few folks in a San Diego office as well.
Oh, I see. And that's what, and then you moved to Montana.
And then I moved to Montana.
Hi, it's Jack, and I hope you're enjoying our talk with CFO Danielle Murcray. Now, we've been hearing the leadership role of the CFO has been broadening for years. There are more stakeholders than ever, we are told. But not every CFO has been able to extend their reach effectively. Anyway, I think the pandemic really did become a catalyst for finance leaders to do that, and not just in high tech or early stage companies similar to AttackIQ, but last century companies, old manufacturing companies where finance leaders have operated the same way for the last 50 years. Here was an opportunity to really extend their voice and reach parts of their organization that they hadn't in the past. That's our commitment to you, to bring you more of those stories, more of the stories like Danielle Murcray's. Let's return to our interview. We're going to jump to what we refer to as our mentoring round, where we'd like you to think back to that first 30 days. Now, this wouldn't be at AttackIQ. This would have been earlier in your career, one of your first CFO tours of duty or chapters. If you could think back to the first time all the responsibilities fell on your shoulders, what would you go back in time and tell yourself your first 30 or 60 days as a CFO? What would you tell yourself?
So it's funny. The CFO that I had followed to Ironport, he once said something to me that I didn't understand until I became a CFO. And he said, sometimes being a CFO is extremely lonely. And I didn't really know what that meant. I thought that was a very strange statement, frankly. And I don't know why I didn't ask what he meant. I probably should have. But now that I've been a CFO for so long, it actually can be extremely lonely because you're often the bearer of bad news, the person that has to say no a lot, and therefore you're not everyone's friend. And who doesn't want to be everyone's friend, right? You want to be liked. And so that was actually a very hard lesson for me personally to learn over the years of being a CFO is extremely lonely.
Got it. You just have to accept it. Yep. Good example for us. Thank you. We always like to see if we can have our guests reflect a little bit on the personal side of things. And we're looking for a personal habit or part of a daily routine that you have, something you're known for, something that sets you apart. We keep the menu wide, but we're looking to distinguish you. What would you tell us? Do you have a personal habit, a daily routine, something that sets you apart? What would it be?
So, for me, it's actually focusing on work-life balance and time management skills. I would say those are two things that have really helped me in my career. I had my first daughter when I was 27 years old, and I was only at my second finance job after graduating college. And then I had my second daughter when I was 30. And at Ironport, of all places, which was crazy with Cisco and everything else, I mean, I can barely remember those days. But the thing that really kept me motivated was creating a work-life balance where I could really look myself in the mirror at the end of the day and feel like I was giving 100% to my career and 100% to my family. I think I was able to achieve that during most of my career due to just practicing time management skills. I really focused on prioritizing my daily tasks, and I picked the 2 to 3 things that I was just going to crush. And I always put my head down during working hours, ensuring that I was operating as efficiently as possible. Now, I'm not saying I always won in the work-life balance game, but I certainly won more than I lost. And for me, personally, I'm very proud to have raised 2 bright and successful daughters who have an incredible drive and work ethic. And I like to think that I had something to do with that, being a working mother and showing them that you can actually have a career and also have a great family life. I'm really proud of that.
What's a little unusual of what you shared is that your children didn't come later. You had them along the way as you built your career. And in
Hmm.
my way of thinking, that's a little unusual. Usually, many women who are professionals who get to the C-suite as young as you were, get there without kids, and then they might start families in their late 30s,
Hmm.
and a lot of professional women do. You did it differently. Would you recommend the way you did it to everyone? Now, I know the answer is no, But do you ever reflect on you might have been fortunate in the sense of having mentors or being part of a corporate culture that would allow you to continue to advance and not see it as an opportunity to slow your ascent? I don't know.
Yeah,
But
I think this is a topic that's just a very personal decision, and I actually I don't think there's anything wrong with talking about this. I think it's important for women, especially if someone is listening to this podcast that is an up and coming CFO, female CFO. You can actually do both. You don't now this. And again, I don't want to offend anyone. If your choice is not to have children or to wait later, that's absolutely okay. And I have a lot of friends, I have a lot of peers that's the choice they made. It just wasn't the choice for me. Maybe you've already noticed, I've sort of in my mind from the time I was very young, I knew I wanted to be an accountant since I was in ninth grade. And so I had a plan and I tried to execute to that plan throughout my entire life. And one of them, I didn't want to be 60 years old and still raising children. And as as I like to say, I'm on the back nine, with my
yeah,
kids now
yeah.
being 20 and 17. And so, I did have a lot of help along the way. And I go back to that culture discussion in choosing companies that value employees. And at the end of the day, companies that value employees know, and you have to prove yourself along the way as well, but that you're going to get your job done. And I'm just a firm believer that you don't need to be in an office 8 hours a day, that you can make choices to say, I want to go to my kid's event and I will put in the hours after they go to bed. You learn how to adjust and to make that work for you. But it does come down to the choices you make in terms of the companies that you join, who you work for, and what their values are. And if you go to a company that is not going to that does not value your work-life balance, that's just not a company for me. It isn't. And sometimes there's one company in particular that I will mention. I had to learn that the hard way, but I learned and decided I'm not doing that again. And I drew a hard line, and I've just been so fortunate to work for companies that really do support just a really great work-life balance. And any company I go to, culture and values, it's the first thing I focus on. It really is, which doesn't seem very financy, right? It doesn't necessarily, but I love that. I love being well-rounded, and I actually really love running talent acquisition in HR. It's something I'm good at, and I think it sets me apart from other CFOs.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you for sharing that. So we always do like to ask for a book recommendation. I don't know, it doesn't have to be a business book. I always say that, but we always get business books. There might be and don't hesitate to give us one. But we also don't mind getting books you like to escape with or have interests in otherwise. Anything come to mind when we ask for a book?
So actually, it's funny that you asked me this question. I might actually have a better answer for this question if you asked me what Netflix show I would recommend, or if I can teach you my double-handed backhand in pickleball. But funny enough, I'm not a huge reader, I'm going to admit, but I actually was in a recent meeting with one of our board members. I do that actually quite regularly. I think it's really important for the CFO to have that relationship with board members. So I do highly recommend that for sort of up and coming folks. But he recommended a book called Dare to Lead by Brene Brown. Not sure if you've ever heard of it, but I'm not finished with the book yet, so I'm going to be honest about that. But there's a lot of discussion around cultivating braver and daring leaders, and really embedding traits like courage and empathy and connection into your values. And again, going back to culture and values, this book has actually very, very much resonated with me. Again, I'm not done with it, but I would highly recommend it. But if you do want some Netflix shows, I'm happy to recommend those as well.
Give us one. Give us one or two.
The Last Kingdom, which just ended, was absolutely fabulous. So, I would highly recommend that one. And then one of the other ones that I actually watch with my daughters is called Love on the Spectrum. which is about people who have autism who are trying to navigate dating life. It's really a fabulous show. I know we're getting a little off topic here.
Well, that's what we're hoping here. We're hoping to drop the script. But thank you. We are up to our final question, where we're going to ask you to look forward finally. And we'd like to hear your priorities as being for a finance leader over the next 12 months. What would your priorities as a finance leader be?
The first one is really continuing to create a flexible business model. And what I mean by that is that, while we at AttackIQ have a healthy portion of the $44 million we raised in our Series C financing, there's still a significant amount of uncertainty in the market right now with the rise in interest rates we talked about, the potential recession, the continuation of COVID. So that uncertainty requires a financial model that can be flexible and really adapt to a changing environment. And whether those changes are, positive or negative, that's just really important. And then the second thing, which we also touched on a little bit, is really focusing on people. Again, I have HR and talent acquisition as well. And so because we've gone 100% remote in the US, and helping with that process has really transformed my role. I'm heavily focused on rethinking employee engagement, which we talked a little bit about, ways to keep employees feeling connected while being fully remote and collaborating with the large teams I talked about in a couple of different locations. And this really includes that entire recruitment to retention process. And I can't tell you if the pandemic has taught me anything, it's that companies really need to continue to find creative ways to keep employees motivated, and through communication and collaboration are just very, very important to ensure employees feel part of the team when we can't all be together. That's something that's going to continue to be very important for AttackIQ, and I think many other companies that have chosen to go remote. So those are the two areas I'll be focusing on in the next 12 months.
Danielle Murcray, thank you for joining us on CFO Thought Leader.
Thank you very much, Jack. I had a wonderful time.
Hello, listeners. Do us a favor. Be certain to subscribe to CFO Thought Leader on Apple Podcasts, or if you're an Android user, check us out on Spotify or Google Play. If you like the show, please recommend it to a friend.